Good afternoon and welcome to the Washington Report with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington. Let's get to it. The House will return Monday and stay in session through Thursday. The Senate is in recess until July 13. Last week in the House came back on Tuesday and voted to pass two measures under suspension of the rules, one of which was a motion to suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment to the House amendment, to the Senate amendment, to the 21st Century Housing Act, also known as the Bipartisan Bicameral Housing Bill. On Wednesday, the House took up and passed three more bills under suspension of the rules, and then they were done. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. This week in the House is scheduled to return today, with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 10 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday and for the balance of the week, the House is scheduled to consider 4 bills pursuant to a rule. They are H.R. 8884, the Removing Barriers to Work for Disabled Americans Act, H.R. 8800, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027, H.R. 8595, the National Security, Department of State, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2027, and H.Res. 1383, commemorating the one-year anniversary of the passage of the Working Families Tax Credit Act, which once was known as the One Big Beautiful Bill. In addition, other legislation may be considered, including H.Con. Res. 108, directing the President, pursuant to Section 5C of the War Powers Resolution, to remove United States Armed Forces from hostilities in Lebanon. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and voted to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 6644, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, also known as the Bipartisan Bicameral Housing Bill. On Tuesday, the Senate confirmed Darrell Owens to serve as United States Representative to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Then the Senate agreed to H.Con. Res. 86, a concurrent resolution directing the President, pursuant to Section 5C of the War Powers Resolution, to remove United States Armed Forces from hostilities with the Islamic Republic of Iran. We'll talk more about that in a moment. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to end debate on and then to confirm the nominations of John George Edward Mark to serve as a United States District Judge for the Southern District of Texas, and Michael J. Hendershot to serve as a United States District Judge for the Northern District of Ohio. Then the Senate rejected a motion to proceed to S.J. Res. 196, a Congressional Review Act resolution of disapproval of a rule submitted by the Department of Education. Then the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Matthew A. Schwartz to be a circuit judge for the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Then the Senate rejected a motion to proceed to S.J. Res. 185, a joint resolution to direct the President to remove United States Armed Forces from hostilities within or against the Islamic Republic of Iran that have not been authorized by Congress, about which we will speak more in a moment. And then they were done. Let's talk about war powers. First up, we're going to discuss dueling war powers resolutions because there's been some confusion about this. Almost 4 weeks ago, on June 3rd, the House passed H.Con. Res. 86, a concurrent resolution directing the President, pursuant to Section 5C of the War Powers Act, to remove United States Armed Forces from hostilities with Iran. The measure passed by a vote of 215 to 208, with 4 Republicans crossing party lines to vote with the Democrats to create a majority for the first time in this Congress on a war powers resolution. The 4 Republicans were Tom Barrett of Wisconsin, Warren Davidson of Ohio, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, and Thomas Massey of Kentucky. And you can do the math yourself. If those 4 Republicans had voted with their Republican colleagues instead of crossing party lines, the vote would have been 212 against the War Powers Resolution and 211 in favor, and the resolution would have failed. 3 weeks later, on Tuesday, June 23rd, the Senate passed the same concurrent resolution by a vote of 50 to 48. Once again, 4 Republicans crossed party lines to vote with the Democrats. This time, 1 Democrat crossed party lines to vote with the Republicans. And here's the important part. 2 Republicans missed the vote. So the final tally was 50 to 48 in favor of the resolution. The 4 Republicans who crossed party lines to vote in favor of the resolution were Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Rand Paul of Kentucky. The Democrat who crossed party lines was John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. The 2 Republicans who missed the vote were Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, who's in a hospital, and Dave McCormick of Pennsylvania, who ironically was actually in Pennsylvania traveling to an event with President Trump at the time the vote took place. As I said, the resolution was a concurrent resolution. That means that even though the resolution passed both houses of Congress, it does not go to the president for his signature or veto. And because it does not go to the president for his signature or veto, it does not have the force of law. It is, for all intents and purposes, a sense of the Congress resolution. Here's what the Congress thinks on this matter. Nevertheless, as a political matter, it says something when 2 legislative chambers with Republican majorities vote in favor of a resolution directing the Republican president to take an action opposed to what he is already doing. It makes no difference that the measure in question has no force of law. On each side of the Capitol dome, a majority of lawmakers voted to direct the president to remove United States armed forces from hostilities with Iran. President Trump was furious with Senate Republicans for allowing this to happen. And we don't have to take the word of White House reporters writing from information gathered on deep background. We can take the word of Republican senators themselves, almost all of whom met the day after the vote with President Trump at the Capitol, when he arrived to join them for their weekly steering committee lunch, to which he had been invited by steering committee chairman Rick Scott. President Trump castigated the 4 Republicans who had crossed party lines, reportedly engaged in name-calling, and said it was a terrible thing to do because it undermined him while he was in the middle of negotiating an end to the conflict with Iran. And the passage through the Congress of such a measure undermined his negotiating position. The Iranians, he said, would take it as a sign he had no support back home and would seek to exploit the perceived weakness to their benefit. Louisiana's Bill Cassidy, one of the 4, rose to his feet and began pressing the president, saying he had said at the outset that it would be a 4-week military campaign, and it had already lasted for months, and we still didn't know for sure what was going on. The 2 yelled at each other for some time, but never came to resolution. Later Wednesday evening, the Senate took up a motion to proceed to consideration of S.J. Res. 185. A joint resolution that would direct the removal of United States armed forces from hostilities within or against the Islamic Republic of Iran that have not been authorized by Congress. It sounds an awful lot like the concurrent resolution, H-Con Res. 86, that passed the day before, and that's led to the confusion. Some people believe mistakenly that the failure to agree to the motion to proceed on Wednesday evening overturns the vote in favor of the War Powers Resolution considered the day before. It does not. They are not the same measure. Just for the record, the War Powers Act was enacted in 1973 at the height of anti-Vietnam War sentiment. President Richard Nixon vetoed the act, but the Congress enacted it over his veto. Nixon considered the act unconstitutional. No president since Nixon, whether Republican or Democrat, has considered the War Powers Act constitutional. Now let's talk about the Save America Act. The House has passed the Save America Act while the Senate has not. The Senate has not even held a vote on the measure, for that matter. Some House Republicans are determined to get the Senate to act, and they think they can do it by the legislative equivalent of holding their breath until they turn blue in the face. Florida Republican Anna Paulina Luna and Texas Representative Chip Roy on Tuesday of last week announced that until the Save America Act passes the Senate, they will vote against all bills coming to the House from the Senate. Perhaps more importantly, they also pledged they would oppose any floor action in the House until the Senate passes the Save America Act, including votes on rules. With the small margin Speaker Johnson has to work with, this is a serious threat. It could relatively easily block all action on the House floor, because no bill goes to the floor of the House without a rule. A pledge by 2 Republicans to vote against all rules means almost certainly that no rules will pass. And that means the only way you can get a vote on a measure is under suspension of the rules. And to do that, you have to win a 2/3 majority of the votes cast. So Representatives Luna and Roy announced this last Tuesday, and the Speaker had to change the floor schedule. The plan for last week included voting on 2 appropriations bills, National Security/Department of State and Energy and Water Development. The Speaker had to pull them from the floor because he knew he wouldn't be able to win the vote on the rule. So instead, the Speaker went back to the suspension calendar and brought 3 bills to the floor under suspension of the rules. Then the Speaker talked with President Trump about the problem, and President Trump accommodated the Speaker by posting to Truth Social a post on Thursday afternoon calling on House Republicans to stop messing around with floor votes, because voting against rules effectively gives control of the House floor to the minority. Since then, no deals have been announced. As far as we know, Representatives Luna and Roy plan to maintain their opposition to all measures on the House floor until the Save America Act passes the Senate. The plan for this week includes a vote on the annual National Defense Authorization Act. If ever there were a must-pass, this is it. This bill has passed every year for more than 60 years. Congresswoman Luna has offered 2 of the 1,363 amendments filed for consideration with the National Defense Authorization Act. One simply attaches the language of the Save America Act to the NDAA. The other would require the Social Security Administration to notify states about women who have changed their names, their last names, to be specific. Congresswoman Luna has announced that if her Save America Act amendment is ruled out of order, she will vote against the rule. Stay tuned. Now to the Todd Blanche nomination for Attorney General. North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis, one of the 2 key Republican members of the Judiciary Committee regarding this nomination, the other being Texas Senator John Cornyn, met with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche last Wednesday and said afterward he thought the meeting had gone well. Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa has said he wants to hold Blanche's confirmation hearings in the Judiciary Committee on July 15 and 16. It's Grassley's hope to be able to move the nomination to the Senate floor before the Senate breaks for its August recess. Now to the latest on FISA Section 702 reauthorization. There still hasn't been any action on reauthorizing Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, which allows the U.S. government to surveil foreigners overseas without a warrant. President Trump said a week and a half ago that he wanted the Save America Act attached to any bill containing language reauthorizing Section 702, and he said he would refuse to sign any legislation that came to his desk without the Save America Act attached to it. And last week, he indicated he meant it when he canceled a signing ceremony for the bipartisan bicameral housing legislation that had passed the House and the Senate just days earlier. Now to the latest on entitlement spending. The entitlement wars have begun. Less than 1 week after the Social Security trustees released their annual report saying the Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Trust Fund would be empty by 2032, liberals on Capitol Hill fired their first shot of the battle to determine how to save Social Security for the next generation. Massachusetts Democrat Senator Elizabeth Warren published an op-ed in the New York Times, that transmission belt for progressive policy positions. Her solution to Social Security's financing problem was simple, if predictable. Raise taxes on rich people, she said, by lifting the income cap on the Social Security payroll tax. When Social Security was established back in the 1930s, they set the tax rate at 1% for employees and 1% for employers. Since then, that tax has been raised 15 times. It now stands at 6.2% for employees and 6.2% for employers, for a combined 12.4% tax rate. In addition, each pays another 1.45% for Medicare. So the total burden between employees and employers is 15.3%. That's money employees would be paid by their employers. It's the cost of doing business for the employers. So employees shouldn't fool themselves into thinking they pay only the employee's side of the tax. They pay both sides, even though for administrative purposes, the government takes half of it directly from employers. Be clear about this. That's just so employees don't rise up in revolt. But that tax is only applied to the first $184,500 of an employee's earnings. Beyond that, he or she pays no payroll tax. So Senator Warren wants to lift that cap entirely. That would raise another $3 trillion over the next decade, according to the economists. So Senator Warren's idea is to raise taxes by $3 trillion over the next decade. That would be one of the biggest peacetime tax hikes in history. And here's the really, really bad part. She got a Republican senator, Bernie Moreno of Ohio, to sign the op-ed with her. So now she can say she's got a bipartisan solution to the problem, and she'll no doubt be flogging it everywhere she can for as long as she can. And that's our Washington Report for this week. If you've got any questions or comments, please drop us a line at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question during the broadcast, just put "for broadcast" in the subject line. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Washington Report. Same time, same channel. Until then, be well and be active.